Thanks so much for being here. Curtsy. Curtsy. There it is. Mario, your big American cookbook. What brought this on?
I've been traveling around for a long time, and I always collect recipes wherever I go. So this is kind of 20 years of doing book tours and traveling around the country, supporting my Italian books. And this is kind of where I ended up going anyway. So as I get to each town, I talk to whoever I'm working with in that town, and whether it's a morning show or a book signing at a bookstore, I talk to people and I say, where do I go to find something that tastes the way the wind smells when it blows down Main Street? And they say, you got to go to XXX, and it's not necessarily the fanciest place. They probably don't take reservations, but they make this hanky-panky, or they make this loose meat sandwich. And when you taste it, you're like, fucking A, I'm in America. And this is good.
Have you ever been led astray?
Often. No, I mean, some things just are, some things when they're not made in the traditional way, or they're made by someone in a hurry, or someone who's not necessarily using just the right product, it can be greasy or kind of not so good, but rarely. I mean, not that often.
How often do you find that when you go to the place that tastes like the wind blows down Main Street, you don't just learn about that particular town, that particular city, but also about the culture that kind of founded that particular city and town?
Absolutely, every time. And I learn about where their immigration came from, and I learn about the people that are serving it to me, and whether their kids are making the high school football team or not, or whether they're in the play, or whether they're involved in city government or in public service or whatever. And it's a lot more fun than just sitting in the hallowed halls of the fancy Four Seasons ordering room service and watching C-SPAN.
C-SPAN is your go-to?
No, it just happens to be. That's generally when you turn on the TV, that's the one that comes on first, after the ones that tell you how great the hotel that you're staying at is.
Right, absolutely. And when it comes to sort of getting these recipes and meeting all of these people, when did you start to learn that food was an entryway to cultures and to towns and people's hearts?
That's my whole life's work, dude.
That's what I mean. When did you learn?
I would say that what made it most interesting to me is just realizing, I think America's apologized for their gastronomy for most of my grown life. And it's in the last 10 or 15 years that we've really come to realize that not only are our fancy restaurants good, but our region-specific and kind of not so fancy restaurants are kind of the treasure chest of where we hold our best, not so secrets, but our best kind of tricks. And that's what makes it more interesting. And as you go, like when you travel through Italy and you go in Umbria, for say, you realize the menu doesn't change that much from restaurant to restaurant, but the technique and the style does. And it's the same thing in South Dakota. Like when you go to South Dakota, you see a lot of similarly named items, but each one is a little bit different depending on how they execute it and how close they are to their kind of original, immigration roots. And when you taste them and feel them and understand the importance of how that has kind of evolved, it becomes almost you're a sociologist. You're going through their culture as you taste their food. And it's intellectually satisfying as well as gastronomically satisfying.
There's an element of the book, we've said the word immigration a couple times, that is a kind of celebration of how America is essentially an immigrated country.
Right.
Why was that important for you to sort of talk about and have in the book and sort of have the history of the immigration of some of these states? Of all of them, really.
Well, I mean, that's what America is. We're the melting pot, and despite what either of the two sides in the present election are talking about, it's the beauty of what makes America great. And what I enjoy about understanding that is the infinite number of stories that you can get from people, whether they remember their great-grandmother or their great-grandfather or their grandfather or their father making a dish, or how they kind of got from where they are, and whether they remember their family tree or whether they don't. They know where they're from and they know what they're all about. One of my favorite writers, a guy named Jim Harrison, who recently passed, I'm going to his house this weekend to do a kind of a memorial for him, wrote a lot about the Native American culture and how all of that kind of mixed with kind of the Northern European stock as they kind of traveled through the Midwest and kind of the plains area. And the richness of the kind of family culture is mimicked in the simplicity and richness of the food culture. And that's kind of, for me, it's hearing the people's stories. It's seeing what they eat and what they talk about and how they live. That is an infinite source of joy for me to discover and find. And that's the same thing as if you're reading a nonfiction or a fiction novel. And it's kind of the same excitement for me. It's uncovering things as I go, as I travel, as I see. That makes life a constant source of joy for me. It's something that I really enjoy to see all these different stories.
Pickling is a big part of this book. Pickling and preserving. Why is that?
I would say pickling and cocktails. I think pickling is a way that we really understand the economy of the frugality of Americans. And I think you can tell a lot about someone by how they pickle. And we grew up pickling all of the vegetables in the summer because we weren't going to buy very expensive vegetables throughout the winter. So we had lots of pickles in our family, and it was always a contest between aunts and uncles and cousins and nephews and nieces who was making the better pickle and what their trick was and how they got them crunchy or how they got them this color or whether they preserved olives or whether they preserved zucchini or dilly beans like my Aunt Marty. I mean, it was all just kind of an interesting way to express your own personality through, vinegar and salt and vegetables. And as you see the regional changes, it also speaks of where you came from. I mean, it speaks of how you did it, whether it's a lot of salt or whether it's a lot of vinegar or whether it's very little. As they say in Italy, anybody can make a prosciutto with a lot of salt. It takes a Zen master to make it with just enough salt so that you can really taste the most things.
Pickling has become kind of not a cliche, but I think a joke for the sort of urban hipster picklers kind of thing. Do you think that's incorrect, that it's kind of become that joke, that you think like everybody should be pickling or trying to understand pickling?
I don't think just because a couple of guys with beards from Brooklyn started pickling that it becomes a joke or a cliche. I think that it's interesting that it's hip now. But I mean, the guys in Brooklyn are also making pizza, and pizza's never going to go out of style. So, I mean, I think that it's been embraced by a lot of people that you wouldn't have thought were picklers. Is the same kind of way that the Food Network was embraced maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and all of a sudden it was kind of groovy to cook again. So pickling is that, and pie making's next. Watch out.
You said, you mentioned hanky-pankies just
Yes.
a second ago. This is a Cleveland staple, correct?
I learned it from Michael Simon.
What is a hanky-panky? I don't know.
A hanky-panky is 50% sausage, 50% ground beef mixed with after you've caramelized it. And the trick is understanding the specifics of the recipe. If you just cook it until it turns gray, it's one flavor. But if you cook it until it starts to make a crackling noise where the fat has rendered out and the crunchy, delicious parts of the beef and the sausages come together as one, then suddenly it's something else. It's really a big difference. And when you cook it like that and then you add ricotta and some Gouda cheese, it makes this really kind of beguiling and delicious mixture. Then you put it on either dark or rye bread, and you toast the bread, then you put it under the broiler, and it gets this almost like crust. And as mundane as it sounds, it's kind of like an open-faced sloppy Joe with no tomato on it. But it's this delicious thing that they eat at the Browns games, which gives them solace while they might be attempting to do the first 0-16 season ever.
Browns fans are not gonna be happy to hear you.
Yeah, the Browns fans are also realistic and realize they really have a chance at being 0-16.
You also say in the book that the key to a good barbecue place is if there's a sign of an animated portrait of a smiling pig and the rear end is on display.
Then you're in a good spot. The Michelin Guide doesn't really understand barbecue, so it's often better to ask whoever's at the Texaco station when you're driving through. Mm-hmm. I think American barbecue is one of the international treasures of deliciousness. And when you go through North Carolina, you realize that there's probably 3 distinct regional variations on barbecue. And then you get to South Carolina, and the whole thing's different. And there's no wrong or right, but it's so geo-specific, and it is so well tricked out, and it is so not so much the recipe, it's more the place you're at and who's doing it. That barbecue is one of the things that we should all celebrate. And I mean, they do good barbecue in a lot of places. Here in New York, I'm a big fan of hometown barbecue over in Red Hook. But I wouldn't say that it's any kind of North or South Carolina. It's kind of like Billy Durney's take on what barbecue is. There's a lot of Asian flavors in his barbecue. It's not traditional American barbecue. But he understands the mystical connection between smoke and meat and fire and beer. It makes me really happy, barbecue.
As much as you travel around the country, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up barbecue in New York City, because in New York City you can find every kind of food from all across the country. But do you still find that when you travel across the country and you go to some diner that someone recommended to you, you still get a different, a more truer, authentic flavor from that area than you would someone doing it here in New York City?
Absolutely, 100%. And it's the same. I mean, like we have a pretty solid Chinatown. We have a pretty solid Asian food culture. But I mean, even if you're adventuresome and you get on the 7 train as opposed to going to our Chinatown here, you can taste a very wide variety of really well done stuff within 5 miles of New York City and Queens,
Yeah.
And a lot of people still won't make that trip. Now, I don't think there's too many South Dakota style diners in New York, though. It's easier to find something from Chengdu than it is to find something from Sioux City. So I always think it's better to eat where it comes from than to eat it in New York City. Although, because I live here, I'm going to give it a shot every time.
You said that this is your most ambitious book in the dessert world. Why is that? How did that come about?
Well, because all of my other books have been kind of based on Italian culture. And the Italian culture, although there are desserts, they're not a dessert culture. Like they would, at the end of a dinner, generally would have fruit and cheese or something very, very simple. The Italians like their dessert kind of in the afternoon or at the end of the morning. Like they'll have gelato on their way to lunch. But they won't really have like a very serious pie or cake culture. Americans, on the other hand, and you can taste it at any county fair that you want to go to, have a remarkable breadth and depth of delicious, perceptibly innovative, thoughtful, interesting things. And a lot of them are just based on sugar and eggs and milk. And from a chess pie to a Woodford pudding to a shoe fly pie to any one of 1,000 different pies, they're some of the most interesting and simple desserts to make that really speak of the region's differences.
Do you have a favorite region? Do you have a favorite sort of region of cuisine, regional cuisine in America?
Kind of. I mean, I'm from the Pacific Northwest, and I love their simplicity in the way that they do things, and I love the palette that we paint with up there. The kind of the seafoody stuff and the very simple apples and hazelnuts and the kind of vegetables that grow there. But for me, the greatest amazing story to be told in America is kind of the lack of evolution that the Southeast has had. That and the Gulf Coast, for me, are places where you still get something that kind of sounds like the song of either Cajun or Creole cooking, or something as simple as a fried grouper sandwich. If I'm on the Gulf Coast and I'm not having a fried grouper sandwich every day, either breakfast or lunch or dinner, something's wrong. And I was in South Carolina a couple weeks ago for my birthday, and when you eat those white shrimp from South Carolina, I don't care how they cook them. They say so much about the place and the technique and the lack of trickiness to it, because the ingredients that you get there are so delightful. And when you have crab there, it's something else. And it's not all tricked up and it's not all real fancy, but it's so delicious, and it sings to me of the place. And that's what makes me so excited. And in the South, still to this day, there are places that aren't fancy and they aren't highly touted and they aren't in the Food and Wine best 10 chefs of the year. And it's still one of the most amazing and remarkable and tradition-laden places that I can find.
In the Midwest and in parts of the country that are obviously aren't New York City or near, mainly in the Midwest, I find that most of the ingredients, even at nice restaurants, are coming from supermarkets a lot of the time. Did you find, or were you surprised that people were still able to sort of concoct a really great meal out of ingredients that you would normally maybe, I don't want to say scoff at, but you would say are not the most organic or the freshest of ingredients?
Good question. I think this book, above more than any of my other books, is about sourcing where you can and what you can. To want a Caesar salad in February, living in Minnesota, doesn't make you an evil person. And to buy your romaine from California doesn't mean you've lost all of your street cred in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Like I think the story behind this book is you can have all of the highfalutin ideals that you want, but to do something with grocery store food that hasn't been vetted and hasn't been approved by Michael Pollan or Alice Waters doesn't mean that you lost. It means that every now and then you're going to have to make a choice, and sometimes those choices aren't exactly the best carbon footprint, but you're going to be all right. Like, you haven't had to throw in the towel just because you decided to buy something from a long ways away out of season. That doesn't kill you. It's not some way to live your life. You shouldn't be on a full raspberry diet for December and January, but you should be able to live outside of your most solid white tower of perfection and still have a good time. And I think that this book, more than any other book that I've ever done, is very grocery store friendly. You can buy almost all these ingredients without having to import things from Italy or Spain or travel across the world to find these esoteric or exotic ingredients, all of which I still love. But this is about kind of the simplest, easiest way to make the most delicious, regional, and still exciting food without ever losing the battle.
Was that grocery store friendliness something that you found when you finished the book, or was that an intention going into it?
Well, as I collected the recipes, they were all grocery store friendly because that's how they were. I mean, that's how they were designed. They weren't designed for someone who needed to find the particular fermented cabbage juice from Transylvania to make this particular dish. They made their own fermented cabbage or they bought it at the store. And so it was kind of along the lines, but it wasn't like a direct thought all the way along. As I got to the end of the book, I realized, yeah, you can buy all this stuff anywhere.
Now, one of the things that you talk about, I think, in the introduction is that you carry a blue card in your wallet from your grandmother.
Yes.
Is that a recipe on that card? What does that blue card consist of?
It's a recipe in her handwriting, and I just took it out because I'm having it kind of, I'm fixing it. I'm putting a little plastic on it because I've taken it out so much. But it's a blue notebook card with my grandma's handwritten biscotti recipe.
Really? What made you carry that around with you for so long?
It's a little piece of grandma. I can look at that recipe and I can hear her saying that you can only eat 8 ravioli. It's just part of her mind.
Carrying grandma around with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's open it up to the audience for some questions. Who has a question?
Hey Mario,
Hey.
thanks for being here. I don't know if you're aware, but today is actually National Dessert Day. So I was just wondering, what is your favorite dessert that you like to make or indulge in?
My favorite dessert is fresh blackberries and vanilla ice cream. It's not very tricky, but it's my favorite thing to eat. That said, if I was going to have somebody whip up a dessert, it would be my mom's blackberry pie with vanilla ice cream.
So desserts with vanilla ice cream are your jam.
Vanilla ice cream's kind of the standard against which I hold everything. I don't know if you've ever been to Morgenstern's Fine Ice Creams down on Rivington and Bowery, but he has 5 different kinds of vanilla ice cream.
Wow.
My favorite is the bourbon one, for obvious reasons.
Next question.
Hi, Mario. I'm over here. So I know it's the Wine and Food Festival in the city right now, and you did an event with Chrissy Teigen last night.
Yep.
I wanted to know, what's the process like putting a menu together for a charity event?
It was kind of an email back and forth. I believe when we were doing the menu, she was in Indonesia, mostly naked on the beach. At least that's how I imagined her. And she had her book, and I had a copy of it, and I don't believe she had my book, but I was just saying, well, why don't we do a couple of past hors d'oeuvres, and then we'll each do a course back and forth. And she said, sure, what do you want to do? And I said, how about I'll do this and you do that? And she said, great. And then somebody else in her office said, well, maybe she doesn't want to do that. I'm like, did you talk to her about this? Because she wouldn't ever call me back and say to do something different. And we did a little back and forth, and then we made this really delicious meal. We were at Bank of America on the 51st floor with a view that, it's astounding, the place that we were cooking at. And they have an entire trained chef group. So basically we walked in, we said, that looks really good, and then we sat down and had dinner. They did a great job, but it was very much just a quick email back and forth. Sometimes it's a lot more complicated because there's a lot more chef egos involved, but she's not a chef ego. She's just fun. And when we sat down, she said, I thought I asked them to get me Doritos. I'm like, we didn't have any Doritos. We have your past hors d'oeuvres.
So much of this book is, it's about all these different regions, but it's also about the basics in these regions in many ways. How important for you as a chef is it to remind people about the importance of the basics?
Well, I think technically, once you can make like a pie crust and an omelet and some kind of a bar or a brownie, you're like 80% of the way there in America. And then all it really comes down to is temperature and time of cookery. Like, there's not a lot of tricky technique in here. But again, if you don't pay attention to the small details of crisping the ground beef and the sausage in the hanky-panky till it's audibly crackling, you will miss the boat. Like, it will taste okay. But if you follow it all the way through, it tastes much, much different, much, much better. And I think one of the lessons for everybody, no matter what level of cookery they understand or have mastered, I always, at least once a month, go through a lot of times I just read cookbooks just kind of to get the idea and then I make the dish. At least once a month, I'll follow someone's recipe to the letter very carefully, because what you find when you're cooking in your house, that your kind of intuition, the way that you season things, the way that you put a lemon or vinegar or sugar or whatever you put in it, it tends to make it very similar to your palate. And when you follow a recipe very carefully, you'll find that things are different than you might have expected. And that's what makes it really an interesting kind of, practices to go through and follow someone's recipe exactly. And when you do that, you kind of expand your horizons as a cook at home.
Have you ever done a recipe to the T and then after you made it that way, sort of thrown the recipe away and then just tried to make it your own way, sort of trying to remember the recipe?
80% of the time. I mean, I learn and I say, wow, that's really interesting, but I prefer it with a little more lemon, or I like more chilies, or I want a little more, or a little less salt, or I want it thicker, or I want it thinner, I want it a little wetter, I want it a little drier, like whatever. At the end of the day, for me, I would always finish everything with just a little bit of chili flakes. I mean, in this book, you'll see I made the recipes exactly as they are. And then in a little orange print at the bottom of it, I said, at my house, we might add some chopped jalapenos or some Chipotle Tabasco sauce, or maybe I'd put crunched up saltines and black pepper on this. And that's just the way that I might make it. But I did not do that to all the recipes. So these recipes are pure in their intention and pretty much exactly as they are in each region.
Next question.
Hi, Mario.
Hi.
Thanks for making Crocs cool. I wanted to know, how did you develop...
Did I do it?
Yes.
I think, in the last 2 weeks, everyone's saying Crocs are cool. And I think it's Alan Cumming that made them cool. I just kept staying on and staying on and staying on. But anyway.
You got a Batman button. You've got a skull and crossbones button on there. They're pretty cool.
That's Batman is because Adam West, who was the original Batman in the TV show, and I share a birthday. And that's not skull and crossbones. That's Keith Richards.
That's Keith. Oh, okay.
Go on. Sorry with your question. Tell me.
How did you develop your signature style and the confidence to wear it?
My wife gave me these shoes about right when Crocs came out. And the very first, our family color's always been orange. And it's because when my kids were 2 and 3, and they're now 18 and 20, I know it seems weird, this between birthdays, I had taken the kids out to what we call the Houston Ball Field, which growing up where I grew up, that would have been called a parking lot. It's over on 6th Avenue and Houston. And my kids were out playing, and all the kids downtown all wear black or gray, and my kids were wearing black and gray. And it occurred to me when I was sitting there with my friends, and my kids were playing, they said, hey, where's Benno and Leo? I'm like, uh-oh. I didn't know. I couldn't find them because there was hundreds of kids, and there were kids in black and gray. I thought at that very moment that I had failed as an adult, had failed as a parent, and lost my children, and they were being shipped somewhere else into a life of slavery. The next day, we got my kids orange and yellow jackets, and since then, orange and yellow have been our family colors. And if you ask our children, why do you guys wear such bright colors? They say orange is the national color of Batali. So, it's just something like, I'm obviously not, I mean, it's a look. I don't know that, that it's a fashion statement. It's just like, at a certain point in your life, you realize, I don't really care what people think about my clothes. And when Clinton Kelly, who's a famous fashion plate who works with us on The Chew, is as proud of my look because he says, you wear it and you do it. I don't spend any time in my day thinking about what clothes I'm going to put on. Like, I don't spend even 1 minute. I grab the first thing in the row of shirts, the first thing in the row of shorts, and I wear the same shoes every day. So imagine all the free time that a lot of other people spend thinking about what they're going to wear that I can devote to doing whatever else I want. Other famous people, like famous for good reason, not famous for cooking, like Albert Einstein and Steve Jobs, they always wore the same clothes. So I'm in a long line of those kind of guys. Thank you.
For the record, I tried this suit on 3 times this morning.
There you go, you see? And you think about it, and are you looking different? Are you looking better today? I mean, you look great. It's a fantastic look, and the sock choice was out of this world. Fantastic.
That was the 3 times.
There you go.
Different socks. I think we have time for one more question.
Hey, Mario. Thank you for being here.
you.
Was it difficult for you to narrow down the number of recipes for your book?
Good question. I had probably 1,000 that I thought were contenders. And I let my editor, Susan Mergolo at Grand Central, let her take a look at it. And then when she came back and cut it down to about 250 or 300, a couple of hers I edited back. And, but it was a little sandwich heavy at the beginning. And we kind of backed that down because I find myself, I'm just a big fan of the entire genre of sandwiches in America. But that I realize might be an entirely different book. But yeah, I mean, editing is always tough because you're always afraid that you'll be judged by what's not there than by what's there. And I think that we got it down to a pretty good choice. I think the vast amount of desserts in there is really the biggest change for me, and I was really excited about that. We probably only cut about 30 desserts from the whole list because they're just so much apart. They're emblematic of what the very regional differences are. So, yeah, there's some pain, but I mean, there's 3 more books left, so I mean, we'll see what happens.
Mario, the book is fantastic. I can't wait to go home and cook some of these recipes. Thank you so much for being here. It's called
Thank
Mario
you.
Batali, Big American Cookbook. Thank you, Mario.
My pleasure.